Vikes Now, I am Dustin Baker. We're doing a live trip today. This is a rarity with this show, at least with me on it. Sometimes the social network goes live, but we're going to do it. So we're going to talk about cut candidates. I'm here with producer Tyler. How are you, man?
Doing good. How you doing?
Not bad. You're fresh off the debate last night with Sean Kenner about Jalen Naylor representing, the pro Naylor side, and Sean was pretty adamant the guy would be cut. So we're here. We're back about 12 hours after that. We're going to talk about some cut candidates because the Vikings regular season is 68 days away, and training camp, rookies reporting, is about 19 days. So we're just about to get over the hump of the slow season. I said last night on the show that 4th of July is kind of the symbolic turning of the page to where it's football season once again. So here we are right now. We got 3 candidates apiece. So I'll set the table. Every offseason, no matter how you dice it, there is at least one player that you're like, what? He got cut? For example, in 2022 was Arman Watts before like the big roster cut down day. And he was on everybody's projections as the starting defensive tackle, like the Jerry Tillery. Boom, he was gone unceremoniously. And then Amir Smith-Marset 2 years ago, he was cut. We later found out, like minutes later, that was because Jalen Reagor became a Viking for a little bit. But those are the types of things I want the group and the viewers to start thinking about is outside the box cut candidates. So we got 6. Tyler, why don't you kick us off with, we don't have to rank these. We can do them however we want. What do you got for your first?
Yeah, I don't mean to spite Sean Kenner, who was on the show last night here with this one, but my first cut candidate is Tristan Jackson. Now, I said on the show last night that I think he deserves a roster spot. He's a quality wide receiver 6, but it appears that assuming if Cam Akers passes his physical, that he will be a member of the Minnesota Vikings. And if that's the case, I don't feel like he is a guy who they're going to stash on the practice squad. I think they would keep 4 running backs, that being Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, Akers, and then Kene Nwangwu. So that leaves, an extra roster spot on offense where you're looking at, okay, we need to cut one more guy, right? And I don't think they're going to cut Nick Muse, just because of the Hawkinson injury and all that, and they seem to really like him. And they have Tanya and Oliver and Munt over at tight end. So I don't think you can make a cut there. So you're looking at one of those wide receivers who are on the roster, whether it be Sherfield or Jackson getting cut and going to the practice squad. And I have Sherfield making it over Jackson because we just signed him this offseason. He's probably our best run blocker at wide receiver. And Tristan Jackson is no stranger to the Vikings practice squad. So with that in mind, I have Tristan Jackson falling just short of making the roster, signing back to the practice squad.
Yeah, and I like that it's Jackson because we know that he can mostly survive the practice squad because he's done it every year. So we wouldn't have to have any paranoia. Like there's some guys on this show, I think inevitably we'll get to, like, for instance, if Andre Carter gets to the practice squad, he's not going to be on the show, I don't think. But if he did, we'd have that paranoia like Luigi Villain got swiped. With Jackson, I don't think we have to worry about that. So you have Akers. You're buying into the Charlie Walter stuff about Akers, and then Jackson is the outside looking in.
Yeah. This is just, assuming that Akers is signed by the Vikings, because I think the Pioneer Press reported it too, that he's going to take a physical with them, and if all goes well, he'll sign with the team. So I'm buying in on Cam Akers as RB3. I think Dwayne McBride's just too unproven for RB3 in the eyes of the Vikings coaches. He was on the practice squad last year, and given the fact that it's running back and guys are going to get hurt, they're going to want kind of someone they can go to in case Aaron Jones misses some time. And now Ty Chandler's your RB1, and they want, a decent RB2. And Cam Akers proved that he can be that last season.
Yeah, and I know you on a previous episode didn't sound extraordinarily high on the Akers idea, but I like that as a RB3 because you wouldn't have the expectation kind of like we had last year where he felt like a mini savior because Alexander Madison struggled so much. We won't have to have that this year. It's basically insurance for an injury, which will inevitably happen to either Jones or Chandler. My first surprise roster cut candidates. We could do a whole show on guys that are guaranteed to be cut or that aren't even a surprise anymore, like Lewis Seen. But I have Patrick Jones, the second on my radar as a surprise cut. And it's not that I'm anti-Patrick Jones. It's that suddenly this group is deep. We were pretty spooked about Danielle Hunter leaving 3.5 months ago. And then the Vikings were able to flip that around and get a bunch of new edge rushers and get to arguably its deepest spot since about 2015, 2016. So this is a sheer math problem for me. When you go through to decide your 53-man roster, you can't keep that many edge rushers. So we know Grenard, Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, those are locks. You sold me on Jihad Ward, and then you're kind of at the bubble right there. Will they keep 5, 6, probably not 7? Andre Carter, I still have hope for, even though I just used him as an example in the practice squad. But because Patrick Jones wasn't drafted by this regime, I don't think there's a whole lot of loyalty there. In fact, he's one of the sole survivors from that draft, not named Darisaw. And then I think you and I, or was myself
It
and
was
somebody,
us. Yeah.
we joked about Patrick Jones' efficiency metric in pass rush. It was like at the very bottom left quadrant of the efficiency ratings. And I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Vikings coaching staff probably pays attention to that. So based on the sheer numbers, I would expect the Vikings to for sure keep Grenard, Dallas Turner, Van Ginkel, Jihad Ward, and then you get into the bubble spot with Andre Carter and Gabriel Murphy, who is supposed to be this year's Ivan Pace, and it's too many human beings. Therefore, because he wasn't drafted by Kwesi, I have Patrick Jones as a surprise cut candidate.
Yeah, I keep going back and forth with Patrick Jones because everything out there suggests that he should absolutely, be cut following this training camp just based on performance and the fact that, our regime didn't draft him. He's a Zimmer holdover. Recently, I kind of went back on it and was like, look, Tyler, I know you don't like Andrew Jones. I don't think anyone, or not Andrew Jones,
Braves
Patrick
legend.
Jones, no one's a huge fan of him. But they are trying him at, 5 tech, getting him some reps there like they were doing with Ward. So that leads me to believe that, maybe they still have a little bit of investment in him. Maybe they view him as a versatile bottom of the roster veteran, which I'm not a big fan of. But, you look at someone who could be a surprise cut candidate. And I think Andre Carter is someone who, he might be fallen just short because his whole thing was he needed to beef up. He was a bit skinny last offseason, needed some conditioning. This offseason, it doesn't look like he's bulked up all that much. So, maybe it's just one of those things where he's just going to be a practice squad stash and the Vikings aren't going to, feel the need to have him as the 5th outside linebacker if he's just not ready for that role. So I have Andre Carter as my next cut candidate.
Oh, okay. So I thought that was in just a segue, but that is your second cut candidate.
Yeah. I'm just not sure if he's ready to take the leap and be, a end of roster guy even.
Yeah, I think what we have to remember is although we had majesty with the Ivan Pace UDFA, even the big name UDFAs, if you want to call them that, they don't all work out. And so I think right now, because he was the Robin to Ivan Pace's Batman last year, we kind of assume that he has a higher ceiling. But in terms of the edge depth that I just discussed, and then spending a lot of time on the practice squad last year, I can see it was between Patrick Jones and Andre Carter if we operate under the idea that Gabriel Murphy will get an audition. So I don't disagree with the Andre Carter one. I hope that he would stick around on the practice squad because his scouting report coming out of Army was pretty sweet. But we shall see. My next one, if I'm going to be wrong on any of these three, it'll probably be this one. I have Jonathan Bullard, defensive tackle. I know the Vikings depth chart labels them defensive ends, but in my brain, I think of them as DTs. And the reason I have him is this roster spot, like a lot, is crowded but it's just crowded with dudes, with guys, with nobody besides Harrison Phillips that would be considered steady or solid. So all the defensive tackles are Harrison Phillips, Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard, Jonah Williams, Jaquelin Roy, James Lentz, the new UFL guy, Jalen Redmond, prospect X, Levi Drake, Rodriguez, Tyler Manoa, and then the nose tackle type, Taki Taimani. And that is 10 dudes, and I think that they will, at the max, keep 5 or 6. So these names that we consider, because we study this stuff with such scrutiny, that are noteworthy names, like, Jonah Williams just got here, Jaquelin Roy just drafted last year. Some of these guys have got to go. And so when I look at Bullard, I don't know that he has the juice to make the roster yet again. If he makes it again, I'm just going to assume the guy's going to be on the roster eternally. He played 57% of defensive snaps last year, but he doesn't do a whole lot to move the needle. And I think that if they are invested in Tillery, and then they do like Jaquelin Roy from last year, and Levi Drake Rodriguez is more than just some late round draft pick, somebody's got to go. And I'll go back to the milquetoast tendencies of the Vikings at this spot. To me, Jonathan Bullard is emblematic of that. So although he's usually safe with this regime, Kevin O'Connell, I'm going to say this is the year he doesn't make the cut, and therefore it'd be a little bit surprising.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because, on my 53-man roster projection, I have him making it as a starter. But you did mention earlier in the show that the Vikings did have Arman Watts, who was projected to be a starter at defensive end, and he ended up being cut for the start of the season. And everyone was like, what the heck?
Yeah.
He wasn't even that bad. The one thing that Watts had that Bullard really doesn't is that kind of level of upside where it shocks you. So, if they're willing to cut Arman Watts a couple seasons ago, it's not too far-fetched to suggest that maybe Bullard is more expendable than we think he is. But I personally don't see it happening. I'd be a bit shocked just because we have so many young guys, like you mentioned, at defensive line that maybe they just want a guy that they can rely on outside of like Harrison Phillips, and he is the embodiment of that, just a 30-year-old veteran. So it's good to have someone on the defensive line who, he might not be overly, he might not be great, but you kind of know what you're getting out of him. So that's an interesting one too.
Yeah, the reason that he would stick to the team or stick to the roster would be the continuity aspect and the run stopping. He is pretty decent at that. But this one just came down to a numbers game of me thinking, well, it's going to have to be some young guy then if they want to keep Bullard that will go to the practice squad. Arman Watts, notably last year, played about 300 defensive snaps and had a 76.2 PFF grade. For those who study Arman Watts' arc, not too bad. Who's your next cut candidate? We've got a couple left.
Yeah, my next one is Andrew Booth Jr., just because I don't think Brian Flores likes him. So when Flores was the defensive coordinator in Miami, there was a highly athletic cornerback who was just in his doghouse, Noah Igbenogany, and he, never really asserted himself as a former high-round draft pick. And I kind of see the same thing for Andrew Booth Jr., where despite all the athleticism, the play recognition isn't quite there. So, it's going to be tough for him to make the roster, considering you've got Shaq Griffin, you've got Byron Murphy, you've got Mekhi Blackman and Caleb Evans, Kyrie Jackson, all these guys, and you just signed Dwight McGlothern, as an undrafted free agent who I think has a lot of upside. I don't think he makes the roster necessarily. But the point is Brian Flores has been out collecting cornerbacks like they're infinity stones, and it doesn't really bode well for Andrew Booth Jr., who's trying to just find playing time. So they might, Kwesi hasn't been shy to admit his mistakes. When they made the Jalen Reagor trade, and who was that old defensive tackle from
Blacklock?
Blacklock. Both of those guys were sort of gambles and they didn't work out. And Kwesi wasn't shy to cut those guys early. And, this is a bit different because this is someone that Kwesi drafted and he has a lot of faith in, or had a lot of faith in. But it wouldn't shock me if he, cuts ties with Booth before the season. and lets Flores really take control of that cornerback room.
Do you see either of the, I guess, other two Vikings Brian Flores cornerbacks, Stephon Gilmore, Xavier Howard, finding their way to the Vikings from free agency? Or is that just a depth pipe dream?
I don't see it. I don't think there's a need for it. You've got two veterans already in Byron Murphy and Shaq Griffin, and they're going to run a lot of 3 safety looks. So that's going to be a lot high dosage of Josh Metellus along with Bynum and Smith. And just like, don't need to divulge too much into the whole Xavier Howard thing right now, but he's got a little bit of a off-field thing going on right now. So I don't see any of these veteran cornerbacks out here as, something the Vikings will really pursue. So I think they're good with what they have right now.
Before I get to my final one, so if we're going to assume that the Cam Akers reporting is somewhat credible and he comes back, you're out on veteran cornerbacks, it sounds like. Who else would they add in free agency? Because they usually, between now and week 1, week 2, week 3 or something, they're going to add one more name that we know. Do you have any theories on that off the top of your head?
I mean, I'd love for it to be Michael Thomas. As much of a head case he is, he would be a very high quality wide receiver 3. If you just sign him to a 1-year deal, that would be great. I'd love to see an offense with, Michael Thomas, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Aaron Jones. That just feels OP. Like, it would be near impossible for Sam Darnold at that point to just, screw up. So get ourselves a quality wide receiver 3, whether it be Michael Thomas or Hunter Renfrow, and, really give our bridge quarterback or eventually JJ McCarthy the best chance to succeed, even if this year isn't necessarily like a win now year.
Yeah, I think it was Josh Fry on this show a few months ago. A couple months ago, we were talking about the idea of Michael Thomas possibly coming to the Vikings, and he made a good point. So last year, Michael Thomas actually played quite well until he got hurt against the Vikings, and so we made the joke that, hey, we just need him to get 300, 400 yards or whatever it is while TJ Hawkinson's out, and then he can go get hurt. That's fine. Then when Hawkinson gets back, then Michael Thomas can do his Michael Thomas thing and then get hurt. Because all they really need before you get that target load from Hawkinson back is somebody to be reliable, catch the ball on 3rd down, move the sticks a little bit, and that can certainly be Michael Thomas. It's just I'll keep going back, and I know we talk about WR3 a lot. It's that they would have done something by now. I mean, we are about 4 months into the time when free agents and new guys can be added. And so they just must be enamored with the guys they have, because we went an entire draft with no selections at wide receiver.
We have a comment, Dustin.
Oh, really? What is it? Is it kind?
Yeah. So it's from 70s born, 90s swag.
Mm-hmm.
Says in response to Michael Thomas that we barely throw slant routes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, actually, there's a good joke for that too. What's the guy's name again?
70s born, 90s swag, and then it's just ... So there's probably more to it.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, that is a great point. Thanks for putting that on screen. I can't remember what game it was, but I was with Yanik Eckhart, who writes for Vikings Territory and is the boss of Purple PTSD. And there was something that resembled a slant in the Vikings offense. And one of us turned to the other one. Oh my God, they threw a slant. And it was like a standalone event. And so 70s born, 90s swag really nailed it here, that they would either have to get with the times and do that, or just not do it and hope that Michael Thomas can adjust, which seems a little weird. All right, let me get to my final one, and then we can conclude with any closing arguments. My last cut candidate that would raise your eyebrows. Again, this isn't guys like no-brainers like AJ Green III. This is guys that'll make you go, oh, okay, he's not on the team. I have a Caleb Evans, and the only evidence that I really have of this is that he was benched a couple times last year. And just like my argument for the edge rusher spot, there are 9 guys at cornerback right now, and because we think the Vikings will keep 6 safeties, they can't keep 6 cornerbacks. Otherwise, you're trimming shit from the other parts of the roster. So right now, I think cut proof are Byron Murphy, Mekhi Blackman, Kyrie Jackson, and then probably Shaq Griffin. And then after that, we have Andrew Booth, who you nominated at the top of the show. And then I have a Caleb Evans. And the only good reason I have for it is because he was in the doghouse a couple times last year, and his career arc feels a lot like Cameron Dantzler. The other cornerbacks, Jalen Williams, Dwight McLaughlin, those are probably cuts or practice squad guys. But it comes down to, I think, whether or not the Vikings keep Evans or Booth. And it's really a coin flip. But to get outside the box here, I'm glad that you picked Booth and I have Evans, because out of those two guys, somebody will probably be shown the door.
Yeah, I can't imagine them trying to stash Kyrie Jackson onto the practice squad. It was kind of a surprise he slid all the way to the 4th round. So it's got to be. We got another comment here. Evans over Booth. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Personally, I personally think Evans has a better chance of sticking around than Andrew Booth Jr. But I mean, Dustin makes a good case for cutting a Caleb Evans over Booth as well.
Yeah, and there's a world where both of them go, but I think that's a long shot. It's really strange and kind of good that when you do this exercise or you hash out a 53-man roster, a lot of the spots are the same, where they're really deep, but they're deep, and at the top of the ticket, it's kind of like, oh, well, that'll work. And so the defensive tackle, there's just so many guys here at cornerback. They don't have any superstars, but they got about 6 guys that we think could play on Sundays. So it's a better problem to have than just having everybody absolutely bad or mid. So I'm glad that this discussion is the way that it is. All right, my man, you got any closing arguments for Tuesday?
Yeah, just one. I think we should go live more often. We already have one guy giving us comments, and I think we can get more in more episodes. So shout out to 70s born 90s swag for commenting and watching with us. And we've got a few other viewers as well who haven't said anything, but we might keep doing this for just every episode and get some fan input while we record it. Really cool.
Yeah, and then if it catches on, we talked about this with Sean last night, I think before the show. As questions come in, we can just give our hot takes on them, and it can be a forum at that. All right, Tyler, thanks for doing this live experiment. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right, later.
All right, man, take it easy.